Hey everyone, welcome to another video. With the release of Christopher Nolan's brand new film Oppenheimer, I really wanted to stop and rank every single one of Christopher Nolan's films. It has been quite a journey watching his entire filmography, as there have been a couple of films of his that have been missing from my personal viewing experiences. So it has been quite a fun journey catching up on all of those. Also, really quick warning before I go into all of these movies. This will contain full spoilers for probably all of Nolan's filmography. So if you do not want to get spoiled for any of his films, including Oppenheimer, please click away now or skip past the movie that I'll be talking about in this list. And let's get into number 12.
I followed anybody. I just wanted to see where they went, what they did. It was supposed to just be completely random. You would never follow the same person twice. That was the most important rule. That was the one that I broke first.
Here, unfortunately, I have Christopher Nolan's debut, Following, which is quite an indie feature. It's filmed all in black and white. It's very short in its runtime too. It's a hair under 70 minutes long. It's practically a short film almost. And it follows a very interesting character in some ways. And it has some of the tropes of Nolan's kind of storytelling in terms of non-linearity. But it's just not that interesting. I just did not get hooked into what they were going for here. And by the time it started revealing things at the end of the film, I just didn't really care enough. The pacing is all out of whack. This feels very much like a student film. And I know some people might like the true rawness of it all. It doesn't have any spectacle as you'd come to expect from a Nolan film because this is on a shoestring budget. Some interesting concepts are here for sure, but I just didn't really enjoy my time watching this, and I probably wouldn't watch this one again.
You and I share a secret. We know how easy it is to kill somebody.
Here I have Insomnia, a kind of detective thriller that feels like the most simple of Nolan's filmography. It almost plays out exactly how you'd expect a detective thriller to play out. The only one thing that is unique is the fact that our protagonist, played by Al Pacino, has to stay awake for many days on end because the place where he's located in Alaska doesn't really have nightfall. And the way that that takes a toll on the character is very interesting. I think the performances are definitely the strongest aspect of this film, hands down. It's honestly one of my favorite performances from Al Pacino. I did quite like Robin Williams in here too, and Hilary Swank. But there's just not enough here that I find too memorable. There's a scene in here that practically ripped off a scene from Seven. And I just think there's just so much more better films in this entire genre. As underrated as it may be, it's definitely a solid watch. It's not terrible by any means. I think the jump between Following and this is quite large, but it still isn't one of his best by a country mile. Okay, so perhaps my first hot take in here. There's going to be quite a few in here, so please be prepared. Number 10 with Dunkirk. I think while it is a technical achievement like practically all of Nolan's films, it lacks a lot of really great character work, which is what you come to expect with a great Nolan film. A couple of those modern films that he's been doing lately just lacked that interesting hook with characters. It felt quite distant emotionally, and I felt like that held him back quite a bit. Also, you take into account just my personal perception of the war genre in film. It's not quite my favorite by any means. I just think that they all play out similar tropes, and they're all technically brilliant, but they all spell pretty much the same message that is definitely worthwhile in telling. But when you see it played out in All Quiet on the Western Front, 1917, Saving Private Ryan, and every other war film, it just gets a little bit redundant and tired, and Dunkirk just wants to do a little bit more of that, and I've just practically had enough of it. The performances are great. I think the third act in this is especially brilliant, and I really like the arc following Mark Rylance's character. It just showed true human spirit and the selflessness a lot of people had during the war, and I really liked that arc, and I wish we had actually followed that the entire movie instead of jumping to all these different places, because as I said, it just made you disconnect from pretty much everyone in the movie. I actually gave this a second watch recently. I watched it one time. I checked out about halfway through because I was just bored, and I thought, you know what, I'll give it a second chance, which I did just after my Oppenheimer viewing, and it just still didn't work for me, even though I found it a little bit better.
As I understand it, we're trying to prevent World War III.
Nuclear holocaust.
Okay, here I have one that I have recently talked about, Tenet, maybe one of the most frustrating movies that I have ever seen, and one that I have always really, really wanted to love, but it just won't let me. It always keeps me at arm's distance, and I just cannot connect with it like I want to. The technical brilliance is in there. There's definitely an excellent third act that makes you reconsider a lot of what came before. I think Nolan had really great intentions with this story. It's very ambitious. There's not enough praise that I can give it in terms of being a well-crafted film, but a lot of the character work, once again, is emotionally distant. You don't really get a connection with the character until practically the minute this film ends, which is such a shame. Even Robert Pattinson's character, who's supposed to be a little bit more of the empathetic and emotionally resonant character, the same with Elizabeth Debicki, she's like that as well, but they just don't play it right, and you just really feel nothing for a lot of these characters, and you're ultimately left with a pretty frustrating viewing experience, as it's so complex and it wants to introduce all of these new things to you, and it just doesn't do it effectively.
You really want to get this guy, don't you?
My wife deserves vengeance.
When you find this guy, what are you gonna do?
Kill him.
Okay, before you get angry at me in the comments, I know that this might be a bit of a hot take as well, but I'm going to let you know that 8 all the way down to 1 I think are phenomenal movies. I would highly recommend every single one of these next 8 movies to you, and Memento is no different. I think it was an excellent film. I watched it for the first time yesterday, and I was blown away with the way that this narrative is structured. You know, one story going forward, another one going backwards, all kind of meeting in the middle chronologically was a very interesting idea. And this felt more of a directorial debut from Nolan than following, because you see a lot of what actually are the type of narrative tropes that he kind of goes into later in his career on a more ambitious scale. So I really like the more simple, toned down, but ambitious at the same time narrative. The performances are excellent. I love just following this character as it kept feeding us more information, you know, presenting us practically the end of this story and working our way forwards and also backwards at the same time, as you get a little bit more context for why these situations unfolded, was just so interesting. And having a character that has no memory is just a pretty excellent reason as to why the story is told in such a way. I think having this character always giving himself a reason to deny what actually happened to his wife, and him finding that vengeance and justice was just very compelling to me. I think that this is a great movie. The only thing I would say is lacking is I just love those more big, ambitious movies. It kind of knocks it over the edge for me. So Memento gets knocked down a bit just because it's lacking that a little bit. But that does not take away from the fact that this was an excellent film that I highly recommend to you. The cinematography is excellent too. I said in my Oppenheimer review, I didn't know that he had used black and white before. I completely forgot that following existed, and I hadn't seen Memento at that point. Now I have, and Memento has an excellent use of black and white that actually plays out very similar to Oppenheimer in a lot of ways in terms of the subjective viewpoint of the character versus what is objectively happening. I really like that approach to black and white, and Memento does a really great job of that.
The first part is called The Pledge.
Ladies and gentlemen, my first trick of the evening is one that involves considerable risk.
Here I have The Prestige, another film that I hadn't seen for such a long time and finally have, and what an excellent film this was. The performances were great. I love Nolan's approach to magic. You know, it kind of explains a lot of how these tricks are kind of utilized in their shows, and I really, really like that as someone who is fascinated behind magic and can never really guess how it actually happens a lot of the time. I'm pretty clueless there. But the way that this narrative plays out is really interesting. Once again, like a lot of Nolan's films, it kind of shows you something that happens in the present or even the future, and it kind of works its way to that point, making it more compelling. And then when we continue on from there, it just really keeps building and building, leading to a final act that just blew my socks off, to be honest with you. This has about 3 major twists, which all completely work within the context of the story if you're paying attention. Hugh Jackman kind of cloning himself through technology, and then Christian Bale having this twin that he uses for his magic tricks, were all just kind of unfolded in really just well done ways, and it gives you enough info beforehand to make you agree that that's not something that is stupid. It's very worthwhile, and it makes sense within the confines of the story. As I said, those final 10 minutes are really impactful, and I really came away from watching this movie kind of amazed at what it was able to achieve.
If you make yourself more than just a man, if you devote yourself to an ideal, you become something else entirely.
Number 6, I have Batman Begins, a film that I have watched many, many times. Who hasn't? Just an excellent origin story. It's pretty much the film that I think put Nolan on the map in terms of a big blockbuster filmmaker, because before then he had done Following, Insomnia, and Memento, which some of them are really great, but Batman Begins really pushed him to that upper level, and I think that he wouldn't be able to do what he does now if it weren't for that movie. And boy, he does such a phenomenal job. This Dark Knight trilogy is my favorite interpretation of Batman. Batman is one of my favorite characters in anything ever. So to see him done in just such a satisfying way was brilliant. Christian Bale was a perfect choice to play this character. I love the villain. Scarecrow was just great. You know, having a little bit of more horror elements in this. You know, I watched this as a kid, and Scarecrow was terrifying then. So to have that more darker nature was something that we weren't really used to. You know, we'd seen a little bit of a darker interpretation with what Tim Burton did in Batman and Batman Returns, but then it went really campy with Joel Schumacher's Batman. This is way more grounded, way more darker than any of those films. And I just really, really liked it. It's so entertaining. Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul as he's properly known as, was excellent. Liam Neeson was perfect as this character. The twists and turns that it has, just really, really phenomenal. And then it leaves setting up the Dark Knight with that Joker card in just one of the best little teasers that I have ever seen in a film. I was ready for the Dark Knight the minute they showed that, and boy did Nolan deliver there.
We're in a race against the Nazis. And I know what it means if the Nazis have a bomb.
Okay, before you say, well, this should be higher or lower or whatever, I might have this higher in the future, but the other 4 films that are higher than Oppenheimer, I have seen 20 to 30 times each, and I love them each and every time. Oppenheimer, I've only seen once. It is phenomenal, yes, but I need to rewatch it a few times before I can consider it being in the top 3, 2, 1, whatever. Technically, this might be Nolan's best film. You know, this is a courtroom drama in a lot of ways. There's a lot of dialogue for sure, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the cinematography was just beautiful to look at. The score was booming and enhanced the film so much. The sound really justified why you should see this in a theater. I truly think that this is one of those experiences where you're actually missing out if you don't see this in a theater, because by God, that sound just shaking your chair is something that I have never really experienced in a theater before. It was beautiful. Cillian Murphy as this character was just so invested. He is deserving of an Oscar nomination for sure. Robert Downey Jr. surprisingly gives just phenomenal supporting work in just such a complex character, such a complex performance that I really think is deserving of an Oscar nomination. The same, I think, can be said for Emily Blunt, who gives an underrated performance in the film. I love the way this played out. Once again, having that black and white as the objective truth versus the color being Oppenheimer's subjective viewpoint of the world and these events that are happening in his life. It's 3 hours, but it was compelling. I was completely devastated by the time that this film ended. I didn't talk about this in my review because I wanted to keep it spoiler free, but here I have said spoilers. The final shot and conversation with Oppenheimer and Einstein was really powerful, and having that slow zoom in on Cillian Murphy's just haunted face as we kind of see the way that nuclear bombs or atomic bombs have kind of evolved with technology and how we have so many of them now was just a very haunting shot. And as I said in my review, I just kind of sat in my chair just stunned, and I almost didn't want to leave the theater for a while because I was just completely blown away by this experience. I think that this film is a masterpiece. Right now, it is my film of the year, and I really cannot recommend it more. And it could definitely get higher in the future on this list, but as I said, I need to see it quite a few more times before I think of that.
What does that mean?
Rise.
Here we go, another hot take. I know this movie has been ragged on a lot lately, and I need to defend this movie. I'm a Dark Knight Rises defender to the day I die. I think that this film is phenomenal. I think it is an excellent follow-up to The Dark Knight, and for the longest time, another hot take, I thought it was better than The Dark Knight for quite a while until I rewatched it again and went, no, The Dark Knight Rises is a little bit weaker, but this film I think is brilliant. This has tropes in it that just really click with me. I love films about the villain kind of taking over an entire area, city, country, whatever, and the hero kind of becomes an outlaw. This does a brilliant rendition of that, with Bane taking over and Batman kind of needing to start an uprising from the shadows. I really love those elements. I also love stories of a hero that we've been following for a while at pretty much the end of their road, years down the track where they're older and kind of at the end of this whole journey that they've been on and coming back for one more adventure that kind of is their most personal and affects them the most deepest. And I really, really like that. Bruce Wayne is affected by the trauma of what happened in The Dark Knight. Nolan paid respect to that film in so many ways years after The Dark Knight. I had been anticipating this finale for such a long time, and I remember it was one of the first films in a theater that I just remember being so excited to see. I loved the way this played out. I've seen this movie so many times and I just love it every time. The finale of this is obviously a bit goofy. It's been talked at length before. You kind of need to suspend a little bit of disbelief, I guess, but I still thought it was satisfying. Him passing the mantle on to Joseph Gordon-Levitt and him being at that cafe across from Michael Caine's Alfred, giving each other one last look, ending the conclusion. I really, really like that, guys, and I think that this film needs to stop being ragged on so much. The action scenes are brilliant, the acting is amazing, and I think that this is better than a hell of a lot of other superhero films out there. It is still one of the best to this day. The Dark Knight trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, and that wouldn't be possible without this excellent conclusion.
There's one thing you should know about me. I specialize in a very specific type of security. subconscious security.
You talking about dreams?
So here I have Inception, a complex Nolan film that I just think is so powerful and has one of the best conclusions in any film ever. I mean, that shot of the top spinning for a while as we're kind of begging that it topples over to show that Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, isn't in a dream. He's actually with his kids and has that satisfying ending. And Nolan, the fucker, he does not let it go down. He lets it falter before the film ends. And I know that he has clarified that it does end up toppling over and it's not a dream, but I kind of prefer the ambiguity of it. It is kind of obvious that, yes, he is in the real world, but just having it hold there for quite a while, I really, really like that conclusion. This film is so satisfying, explaining a very complex narrative of dreams within dreams within dreams and all these layers, and putting it in a bit of a heist movie was just such an interesting take on that genre that we have never seen before. I don't think anyone could execute this quite as well as Nolan. Hans Zimmer's score in this as well is so powerful and just enhances this film to another level. And I know I wasn't crazy high on this when I first saw this the first few times. I still loved it. But then I watched it in a cinema before Tenet, about a couple of days or a week before that film. And by God, seeing that film in a theater was the definitive way to watch Inception. It was made for the theater. So many of the scenes are just enhanced so much more than just watching it on your TV. I really, really mean that. Nolan is someone that I just think is one of those filmmakers that really justifies you buying a cinema ticket and going to see this on the biggest screen possible with the best speakers. Inception really, really justifies that. And the practicality too of this all. The hallway fight sequence, they were actually in a structure that is spinning. Like, that just doesn't get pulled off in a lot of modern day films. You look at, Indiana Jones or The Flash or any Marvel movie, you're not going to see something like that. That is just really brilliant technical filmmaking and shows a commitment from Nolan to really, truly give you an experience where you're just satisfied and you're kind of questioning how a lot of this stuff actually happened. Inception, a powerful film, 100%. I rewatched it recently before Oppenheimer. It's still incredible and I couldn't recommend this one enough. I also want to just clarify that number 5 to number 1, I consider to be 5-star films. They're all kind of perfect in their own unique ways and just really did a lot for me. Inception is one that I've seen so many times and just justifies being a 5-star film.
And here we go.
This city deserves a better class of criminal.
Okay, this movie is high on everyone's list. I don't even know how much more I can add here. The Dark Knight, yes, it's one of the greatest superhero films ever made. It's one of Nolan's best films ever. The probably best Batman movie I've ever seen. Heath Ledger's Joker is one of the greatest antagonists I've ever seen. The performances are just across the board phenomenal. This almost feels like, in a way, something similar to a gangster film in a lot of ways. There's a lot of that crime, dealings with drugs and money, and then the Joker just kind of puts this spin on it that just makes it so much more interesting and unique. And what he does by the end of the third act is truly brilliant, with him turning Harvey Dent, someone who is modeled as a savior for Gotham, a truly good person who is almost in a way loved a lot more than Batman, who has a more darker way of handling this crime. He's violently attacking them while Harvey Dent is doing it the right way. And Joker turning him into just a real evil person, pulling him down to the filth of Gotham, was a real powerful message by the end of the film. Truly a fantastic film in a lot of ways. Once again, commitment to practicality, cinematography, the score, all great. So many iconic scenes. There's really not much more I can say about this movie that hasn't been said before. We all know it's excellent. And let's get into my number one Nolan film, maybe another controversial pick.
Murph, I love you. Forever.
Okay, so I have Interstellar at number one for many reasons. It is one of the first complex films that I have ever seen that made me think about it long after I watched it for the first time. Him going into that black hole, into basically a fifth dimension, something that we just cannot grasp as humans at all. I still have trouble grasping it today watching that film. Was something that just made my head spin in a lot of ways, where I was looking for a more conventional answer. I was thinking maybe aliens are the ones that created this. But it's just not like that. There's a lot of ambiguity to it. There's a lot of thinking behind it. And I really like that because we don't know what's in a black hole. No one can find that out. And Nolan's interpretation of this is truly interesting. He puts a lot of science and math behind it. I believe he worked with a ton of physicists in terms of recreating the look of the black hole. I said this in my Tenet video, where this film was made long before we got our first picture of a black hole for real. In theory, we know that they've been out there, but we have never actually seen it before until, I believe, in the last few years or so. And guess what? Even though it's very faint and blurry, it looks similar to the kind of black hole that Nolan made in Interstellar. And that is just brilliant in so many ways. This, to me, is my favorite sci-fi film of all time. It has a lot of realism to it that I really like. You know, it has NASA looking for a way to save the Earth. It's not crazy futuristic like a Blade Runner or something. Not that that's not a great movie, because it is. But I just love that more grounded nature to this sci-fi that I think really worked in a lot of ways and made a lot of the more outlandish moments kind of believable, because Nolan gives an excellent justification for how these planets work and how time moves, because it's based in math and facts. And what a commitment. I really love that. The performances, don't get me started, are all phenomenal. Matthew McConaughey gives one of his best performances ever in this film. I mean, who hasn't cried at the iconic scene of him watching his kids age as he lost so much time going on a planet where time moved differently? It's devastating for so many characters, that moment, that they've lost so much time that they can never get back. By the time we get to the end of the film and so much more time has passed, it's kind of sad in a lot of ways, where his character is kind of stuck in the past and humanity has just moved well beyond him, and he sacrificed so much, but without his character doing all these things, they wouldn't have the answer. I just love the way this whole film played out. I watched it recently and it was just as satisfying as the first time I watched it. Hans Zimmer's score in this is one of the best scores of all time. It is emotional. It has that epic nature that the film is going for. I really cannot recommend this film to you enough. It hovers around 2 hours 40 minutes, around that length, and to me it just flies by, because it's just hitting you with one thing after the next. It's showing you different planets that are interesting. It's playing with concepts that are just so fascinating. I have a deep fascination in space. If I wasn't such a wuss, I would gladly be an astronaut. If I was good at math as well, I would definitely be an astronaut, because I have such a deep fascination with space. I've read so much about it, and I think Interstellar plays with it in just a really excellent, fascinating way that just makes you question things a lot more. You kind of feel very small after watching that film, and to me, this is Nolan's magnum opus. I don't think really anything he could do can top Interstellar, because every time I watch a Nolan film, I instantly start comparing it to that film, and it never lives up to it, and I really got to stop doing that, because Interstellar is just a film that you can never really recreate in terms of what it achieves. It has, across the board, the best of Nolan's technical filmmaking with pitch-perfect CGI, a lot of practical moments as well that make for a truly unique experience. It's such a shame that I never got to see this in a theater, because this film was built for it. I think this film would be fucking incredible in a theater, and I'm so sad that I just have never been able to get the opportunity to do that. Trust me, if it ever happens, if one screening pops up, I am there day one on the biggest screen possible, because it just deserves that. Anyway, that's my list for all 12 Christopher Nolan films. Let me know what your list is in the comments below. I know a lot of people have very differing opinions. I know some people don't like some of the movies that I put up really high and really love some of the movies that I put lower. And honestly, to me, from, as I said, 8 to 1, you can make a great justification for being Nolan's magnum opus and being his best film, because he's that great of a filmmaker, guys. Like, he just knows what he's doing. He's one of the best living filmmakers, and we're honestly truly blessed to have someone like him that really is able to achieve what he can on such a grand scale. The fact that he has been able to be afforded millions upon millions of dollars to make these massive, ambitious projects that are kind of made for adults and have challenging themes, but are also so accessible. No one can do it like he can, and he really is one of the best filmmakers alive. And Oppenheimer once again shows that. I really hope he is able to get his Oscar here, because it is so overdue, and it would be such a great moment. With that said, remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.